again for another episode of the BioHub. Today, we have a guest who has spent the last 25 years in healthcare as both an operator and investor. Currently the CEO of XOMA, former CEO of SaleBio, and former CEO and co-founder of Cullinan Oncology, who did $380 million in private raises before a $250 million IPO in 2021. Prior to Cullinan, he served as CBO for Intarcia Therapeutics. He started his career on Wall Street, initially in equity research at Morgan Stanley, before transitioning to buyside, where he managed public and private healthcare investments for Brookside Capital. He was also the chairman of Radius Health before its sale of $890 million, lead independent director for Translate Bio before its sale of $3.2 billion, and is currently chairman of Ikena Oncology. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Owen Hughes. How are you, Owen?
Max, I'm doing very well. Appreciate your time today and look forward to chatting.
No, likewise. Honestly, a pleasure to have you. Really is. Really is. So let's crack on. So how did you get to where you are now, and what inspired you to get into the industry?
Great question. A lot of luck, to be quite honest. But the one thing I've realized in this particular business is that when you attach yourselves or find great partners, great people, good things can happen. I was very fortunate in my college years to have played a sport. The consequence of that is I spent a lot of time in the hospital with injuries, and I was always fascinated by orthopedic surgeons. And I wanted to actually be a doctor, but quite frankly, I wasn't smart enough to do labs and play a Division I sport at the same time. But subsequent to my final year, I met a gentleman who was vice president of investment banking at a very well-known investment bank in New York, who solely focused on healthcare. And frankly, the only reason I ever got my first job out of college was because of this individual. And fortunately, I stayed in touch with him for many, many years. He actually went on to become the CFO of many publicly traded companies, probably most famous for the sale to Roche, Spark Therapeutics. His name is Stephen Webster. And Stephen really gave me a love for healthcare and allowed me to actually enter into the industry. And then through the years, just attaching myself to very smart people, learning from them, having a number of great mentors. And then, like I said before, just being in the right place at the right time and getting very, very lucky is kind of what got me into healthcare.
Yeah, I think it's even something my dad actually says. It's not what you know, it's who you know. That always rings true across pretty much any industry.
I would say relationships are by far the most important thing. I tell my kids at night that they can pretty much do anything in life, but when you know certain people, it makes it a lot easier. And so, listen, we can all sit in front of a computer and we can look at 10Ks and 10Qs. We're looking at clinical trial reports, but at the end of the day, the way I learn is actually talking with people and getting a better sense for what's transpiring in the industry through communication. Visiting people, not sitting at a desk, but going out and meeting people. I really think it's the most important thing. And certainly anyone that I've worked with in the past who's been junior to me, I've always encouraged them to not sit in the office. In fact, when I worked at Bain Capital, the portfolio manager who ran our fund essentially told us one day during the depths of 2008, 2009, to shut your computer off and go invest. Go look for companies, get up, go walk around, go meet people, get a better sense for what's actually happening in the real world, not sitting and looking at a screen, looking at red and green dots. And I've taken that to be probably the best advice I've ever had. And that gentleman was by far the best investor I've ever worked with. He got to retire at the age of 40. That's how good he was. But what I would say is you just can't replace, it's one of the consequences, I think, of COVID is that it's great that we communicate across the sea and the oceans through Zoom, but you can't really replace, face-to-face contact. You just learn things, whether it's in a situation like this or frankly at a company, just walking down a hall, popping into someone's office and getting a better sense for what the data looks like, whether it's preclinical data or clinical data or experiment that was run. I really do hope that we can get back to that, over the near future, because I think it's really paramount to a successful endeavor.
No, I agree. I mean, I even look back to, how I got into I suppose biotech, but recruitment really. I actually met the CEO of my old company in a bar who convinced me to come and work for him. It's, I didn't necessarily dream of going to work in recruitment from when I was young. People didn't ask me when I was 10-year-old, what do you want to be when you're older? And, recruitment was never the answer.
Sure.
So it's just who you know, and, and that often takes you away. And, you use that word luck, which I think can sometimes be pretty interesting, especially in biotech as well, because there is an element of that, but you can't really rely on that too much.
No, I think the prepared minds find the opportunities, right? You have to make your own opportunities, but when you actually have them, you have to seize them, and that's maybe where luck comes into it a little bit. But the biotech industry is very fickle. Whether it's financing, whether it's data, whether it's picking the right target, whether it's simply just being in the right place at the right time. A lot of things have to go into it, but luck certainly is one of them. But the other thing I would just focus on is just the people. I think as an investor, you generally speak with 3 or 4 people inside of a company. You'll speak to the CEO, the CFO, generally the chief medical officer, perhaps the head of sales, maybe 1 or 2 additional folks. But you never, frankly, talk to the people who are underneath them. And what I learned very quickly in my first job away from the investment side and the operating side is it's the people that are underneath the management team, and frankly, even maybe 1 level lower, that actually are doing all the work. And so, the strategy may be coming from the executive team, but the execution is coming from the folks that are underneath. And if you don't have a cohesive group, it makes it so difficult. It's kind of like a professional soccer team. Now, I don't follow professional soccer per se, but when you have a team that loses quite often, the morale decreases pretty significantly. It's no different inside of a company. And so that's the way I approached it. And, if you have one cancer inside of a company, it can very easily metastasize. I think, scaling businesses in biotech is unbelievably difficult. I actually think it's the most difficult thing to do. Going from research to development to commercialization. There are very, very few companies that have been able to do that successfully. It's one of the reasons why I think you see so many M&A situations in healthcare and biotech specifically, is that the skill set required to do each of those disciplines is so distinct from one another, and the capital intensity to do all of those right it's an enormous amount of capital.
Yeah, no, that's so true. And I actually did a bit of a LinkedIn rant about this morning. You can often get sidetracked by those long-term goals, and in biotech, that commercialization always seems so far away. So celebrating those little wins, those little victories, can be really important along the way. Obviously, I've never been on the inside of a biotech team, but that's how we see it at Avetix.
Yeah, no, I would agree. And listen, I think from a CEO perspective, you need to have a dreamer, because there are so many things that can go wrong in this business, and you need to have Teflon type of skin, because you have to rebound, honestly, almost on a daily basis. My analogy is that there's always a fire alarm. It's just a question of what degree. Is it a 5-alarm fire or a 1-alarm fire? 1-alarm fires you can deal with, and frankly, they happen all the time. It's the 5-alarm fires that become very difficult to extinguish in this business. But I think you're 100% correct. You just need, at the end of the day, you need to have a lot of perseverance, a lot of tenacity, a little bit of luck, good people, and frankly, great science, of course. And picking the right targets, picking the right indications, the right therapeutic areas. There's just a lot that goes into it.
Yeah, and that leads really nicely onto the next question. Talking about your early stages of Cullinan Oncology. What challenges did you face, and how did you overcome them?
Sure. What I would start with is that the genesis of the company came from a gentleman by the name of Thomas Eberling, and Thomas was the CEO of Novartis Pharma. Thomas is probably the smartest individual I've ever met in my life. And he really was responsible, along with some others, but mainly responsible for the rejuvenation of Novartis Pharma. And Thomas came from a consumer background. And what he couldn't quite understand about the pharmaceutical industry and biotech industry is that you spend hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars only to realize that your drug doesn't work. And he's like, this is just insane. In the consumer space or the tech space, the the amount of capital, the magnitude of capital is a pittance of what it is in the healthcare space. And he's like, is there a better way to develop drugs? And one of the things that we started talking about was just what I had learned in my investing career, which is, portfolio diversification. And can you create if you're in one therapeutic indication, can you have a core team so you can create economies of scale? And can you kill programs quickly so that you actually are allocating capital to those programs that are working? And so that was the genesis of the company. It sounded great in paper. In execution, it's probably a little bit more difficult. When we started Cullinan, we had one venture firm that provided us with a significant amount of capital, to which I'm eternally grateful for that capital. But we had no assets. We were going and looking for things. And the hypothesis was that, through relationships and things of that nature, we'd be able to find some interesting assets. And this is at a time where the cost of capital was going down pretty dramatically to eventually essentially zero. So I think we were very lucky to start the company in the time frame that we did. If we try to start it today, I just think the cost of capital is a lot different today than it was back then. Although perhaps today is probably a better time to be doing it, just because there's so many people that are trying to move to the clinic side and are unwilling to invest in early stage assets. Now you have the opportunity. You want to be where no one else is, frankly, let them come to you. But the challenge at Cullinan was finding the assets and having the discipline to kill assets. And we got the company public. They actually have one program they have several programs in the clinic, but one in particular that's doing very well by patients. So that's clearly what I'm most proud of. But in another sense, we probably prosecuted 20 plus programs when I was at Cullinan for the 4 or 5 years that I was here. The far majority of those programs we killed. And I think it's that type of discipline that you learn on the investing side, that if you actually port that to the development side, I think maybe you'd have a more efficient development process and more capital going into better projects.
Yeah. So, if you were going to give advice to someone starting a biotech startup or going into that venture, what advice would you give?
That's interesting. Well, I go back to what I said before, is you're only as good as the people that you surround yourself with. Generally speaking, if you surround yourself with people that are better than you, which I was very fortunate to do, one, you're going to be in a pretty good position. I often thought or think that you can hand a great asset to a very bad management team and have a very bad outcome. You can also hand, an okay asset to a great management team and have one of the best outcomes ever. I really do believe it all comes down to the people. So I was very fortunate to be able to recruit, namely through the venture firm that supported us, a number of high-profile oncology drug developers that not only had a tremendous amount of experience and were extremely smart, but they were just great people. And that's the thing that I was probably most proud of, is that there was no I in Cullinan. It was all me, right? It was the team. And I think we just had very selfless people who were willing to actually cut their program, or willing to say we shouldn't invest any more money, even though that meant they may not have any work for the next 3 or 6 or 9 months. And so it's kind of like there's a team here in Boston called the New England Patriots. They're a very famous team and done very, very well over the years. And it was run by a gentleman who essentially had one motto, which is just do your job. And if you do your job, everything else will coalesce around that. And so my advice would be just get the right people, right? And that includes your coworkers, it includes the investors, it includes your partners that you're licensing assets from. It's much easier said than done, for sure. Finding great people is very difficult, and that's actually why we use people like you and your firm and the new firm here, because we don't have eyeballs across the globe where you guys do. But yeah, say that the people at the end of the day are by far your biggest asset, and if you have the right people, good things can happen.
Yeah, and that's a common theme across a lot of the podcasts, which is like you say, great for us as a firm. That's what we do. We're people orientated, finding the right people. So it's quite a nice advert for us.
No,
but you're right, it's so true. Even when we're building Avetix here, we want to surround ourselves with people that we want to go on a journey with. We want to grow and become that next big firm.
Yep.
It's the same kind of thing. You've got to make
Yep.
sure that you're not only finding the right caliber of people, experience-wise, background-wise, but also, the people you want to work with, culture-wise, everything like that. And that's where, like you say, it becomes easier said than done.
There's no doubt about it. I had an opportunity to meet with a couple of pharmaceutical executives, one in particular who was a West Point grad who had a remarkable career. And I asked him one question, which was, what's your success? And he said two things that I thought were pretty interesting. The first was that whenever he visits a site, he spends the first hours just shaking people's hands, making sure that people understand who he is as a person and as a leader. The second thing he said was that, listen, you don't need to have a tremendous amount of love for your colleagues, but what you do need to do is be able to interact with them. And at the end of the day, go downstairs to the bar and have at least one beer with them. You need to share some common goals, some common interests. And I think he's 100% correct. There's competitive dynamics that he talked about. He himself was an athlete. A lot of those dynamics that you find in an athlete in terms of the competitive nature, the unwillingness to ever say no, those type of attributes are all very important. But at the end of the day, it just reinforced the hypothesis that if you start with a great core nucleus, then good things will come to fruition.
Yeah, 100%. So in your various roles, what is your approach to team management, and how do you foster innovation within your teams?
Yeah, I mean, my approach may be a little bit different than many, but my view is that if you hire great people, just provide them some goalposts and let them go crazy. That's why you've hired them, right? They have a skill set that you don't have that complements yours, enhances yours, or brings some to the company that other people don't have. And so I think the worst thing you can do is micromanaging. You have to give people a lot of independence. Yes, people have to understand the goals and the objectives of the company, but when it comes to detailing certain experiments or those things that you have to let people do what they need to do. And frankly, even at the expense of actually being wrong. In fact, I think that's actually the best learning, is that when you are wrong, you have some reflections. So in that vein, one of the things that we try to do at my various companies was reward failure, which sounds quite unique or at least crazy. But unless you're taking risks, I don't understand how you're actually going to progress the science. And in the sense that if someone comes to you and says, listen, I want to run this experiment, and this experiment is essentially a killer experiment, it's going to tell us more or less black or white what the result is. I'm all for those experiments because I'd rather spend money up front than actually trying to discover that the drug doesn't work in humans. Now, there's so many things that happen, translatability and all those type of things. But when I say rewarding failure, it's really rewarding risk-taking. Right? If someone comes into you and says, listen, I ran this experiment, it just didn't work. I tried it again. I couldn't recapitulate the results. And frankly, I don't think we should put additional capital into that. I would reward that. And I would say, listen, this is probably the best thing that happened to us all day. Because now what you've done is you've taken capital that we would have put into that actual program, and we can actually put it somewhere else where we hope we have a higher reward. It's actually what you learn in investing. It's interesting when you speak with people in the operating side, a lot of management teams, I would say they don't have very high opinions of Wall Street or the people that actually work on Wall Street. But I'd say the one thing that Wall Street does is that it forces you to make decisions with very little information in very short periods of time. And I think that's a great skill set to have in the operating world. Now, perhaps you need a little more time in the operating world because Wall Street's a little bit more dynamic than operating a biotech company. But I think the discipline around capital allocation and the discipline around terminating assets that aren't meeting your objectives, your TPP, I think that's so important because what we've lived through in the last 4 or 5 years, I'm not quite sure we'll ever see again. I mean, we've lived through certain cycles in the biotech sphere. We had in the 80s, we had a very nice pop, and we've had several in my career. But I've never seen the cost of capital literally go to essentially negative. We had one investor call us at Cullinan when we were doing our Series C round just before the IPO. This gentleman had never seen any of our data, and he's like, "I want to put, a fairly large sum of capital into your into your company. And I said, well, how can that be? Because, honestly, just 6 months ago, we couldn't raise any capital. And then we started getting a little bit of momentum. And I said, but you've never seen the data. And it's kind of at that point that I knew we were in a little bit of a bubble. The point being is, like I said, there's so many influences. There's so many factors that lead to success. Timing is certainly one of them.
Yeah. I think going back to what you said earlier as well about, almost rewarding failure. There's a famous entrepreneur in the UK, a guy called Stephen Bartlett. I don't know how famous he is in the US. But he actually, in his own company, has put a chief failure officer, basically with that concept where he almost rewards failure, and that person then analyzes that and makes sure, that capital's put in the right place and all of that. But, that's obviously an extreme example of someone who's doing something quite similar.
Yeah, it's interesting. Listen, I think risk taking is extremely important. It's kind of what leads you to the promised land in many respects. But going back to the original question is that hire great people, let them do what they need to do, give them a ton of independence, and come together collectively as a team to make decisions. I do realize, I think I had a number of folks that I've worked with in the past that didn't quite understand my style. And it's not that you need consensus, so to speak, but there's no one person inside of a company that can make decisions. I just don't believe that's the case, because no one has all the information at their fingertips, not engrossed in the actual details. And I've been very fortunate over my career to work with some great people, all of them that were great team members. And I think that is the ultimate. It's just it comes down to the people.
Yeah, I mean, here comes a comparison that you'll most likely love. Steve Jobs had that mentality, where you hire in great people, you give them the responsibility that they want to be able to make decisions, and then therefore keep those people. But the way he described it is we're a company driven by ideas, not by hierarchy. And he's more than happy to say his idea is not the best idea, and they have healthy arguments throughout the company, but because of that, the best ideas come through and come strong. But he basically said the same thing, where he gives them the freedom to have their own responsibility and have those ideas.
Yeah, I mean, if I had my druthers, frankly, I would have no titles inside of a company.
Really?
I tried to do it. I started off by doing it, but I understand the importance of having titles, especially from an external perspective. But I understand I never had the opportunity to meet Steve Jobs, but I understand where he's coming from. And I certainly understand the notion of actually a company built on ideas and not on hierarchy. I think that's, I think the political nature that seeps into companies, you don't really have it in Wall Street. You may have infighting for capital or for stature, but generally speaking, you work in little fiefdoms, right? And those fiefdoms are allotted a certain amount of capital, and you go to work and you have 2 or 3 people that you work with. And frankly, those people are like brothers and sisters because you're with them 16 hours a day, generally speaking. On the corporate side, it's a little bit different. I think there is a lot more political infighting. And I think if you can weed that out, it's so unbelievably important. And like I said, it just goes back to what I said before. I don't want to harp on it again, but it just comes down to the people that you hire. If there was a magic potion or a magic process to hiring folks, you'd probably be the most wealthy individual in the world. But unfortunately, none of us have actually developed that system just yet.
No, it's hard. It's hard, and that's one thing we're trying our best to do.
Yep.
In terms of trying to perfect a process. But I think that for us, ultimately, our success is going to come down from getting to really understand the companies that we work with. I think that the better we can do that, and that comes down to meeting in person, having beers with the leadership team and everything like that, to really understand them and then making those matches across the board. And I think that's one area of focus we're really going to try and put on, because even if you're hiring someone, from a few interviews, you don't necessarily know if they're going to fit in culturally or anything like that. So that makes our job even harder, who's then trying to guess your side and their side. So the better we can understand both sides, the more and obviously the longer we work together, the easier it gets to be able to do that.
Yeah. Every company, a company's like a house. It has its own feel, its own look, its own culture. And even though you may have the same CEO in successive companies, the culture may be very different just based on like the indication that you're going after, or what stage of company you're in. So I totally understand your point of view. Is your job is to get to know the company, get to know the people, and then try to make the best match. But frankly, you can't do that over Zoom, and you can't do that reading a PowerPoint deck. You really have to go see them, feel them, look in the whites of their eyes, so to speak, to get a sense for kind of what their core values are.
100%. Yeah, and that's something, I probably lacked in as well, if I'm being 100% honest. And it's something this year I am definitely going to be doing a lot more of. I'm happy to go to North America for a beer, or I had a conversation with a client who's in Paris, and I'm going to go across for lunch and then fly back the same day, because it's just so important. And I'll do that a lot more often. But I know that's something that you guys are fairly used to. But in the world of recruitment, when like we're talking about now, it's so important to get to understand the company you're working with. We just, as an industry, we just don't do it enough. So that's something we're going to really do this year. But yeah, moving on to your thoughts in terms of the future. You touched on it a little bit. What trends do you see shaping the future of biotech, and how can aspiring entrepreneurs position themselves for success in this evolving landscape?
Yeah, one thing that I've seen in the last several years that is a bit baffling and actually somewhat upsetting is the therapeutic density. And what I mean by that is that the number of companies going after the same target. Mm-hmm. And perhaps it's in a different modality. But at the end of the day, I think we as an industry need to continue to take risks. We need the investors to actually understand that in order to generate a significant return, generally speaking, you're going to have to take significant risk. And there's risk embedded in this business model, in this business each and every day, in every facet of the business. But what I find so interesting, in my conversations with investors over the last, call it 6 to 12 months, there's a number of them that are shying away from preclinical development or preclinical assets. And to me, that smells the opportunity. That's actually where you want to be, in my view, at this point in time. Everyone is trying. So if you've seen lately, the companies that have good data have been rewarded. They're able to generate or raise pretty significant amounts of capital. This is as a public company at not significant discounts to the prevailing price. And the quantum of capital being raised is pretty significant. But with that said, when that happens, you're going to revert to the mean, because there's only so much capital that company can use efficiently to develop the compound. And then on the other side of the equation, you have all these companies that are starving for capital that may have ideas that are as good, perhaps they're earlier, but their cost of capital has gone through the roof. What used to be 0% back in the 2019, 2020 timeframe is maybe 50% today. And it sounds crazy, but frankly, you see public companies out there today that have market caps of $100 million with $100 million of cash in the balance sheet. And in 6 months, they're going to have to raise 50 to 100% of their market cap. Like, your cost of capital in that situation is literally 50 to 100%. That's the type of dilution you're taking. And then you go even further. I was just looking at something from Bruce Booth at Atlas, where I'm glad to see that the number of investments in the ventures field haven't been significantly reduced. Perhaps they're skewed a little bit towards the later side of things, but as I said, my view is that where you get rewarded today is going where other people aren't. It's very simple. It's kind of what Gretzky said. You want to skate to where the puck's going, not where it's been. It's the same thing in biotech to me. It's amazing. If you look at where oncology was 10 years ago and then 5 years ago, and then even today, relative to immunology, immunology, I&I is clearly the hottest thing now in biotech. Mm-hmm. I just wonder, like, at some point, is the government ever going to fix pricing in antibiotics, and antibiotics is going to be the place? Because frankly, antibiotics, it's amazing to me that you charge a couple $1,000s for a course of therapy, and it saves the person's life. And yet we talk about some of these oncology indications where you're extending someone's life 3 or 4 or 5 months, which is great. And it's an improvement, don't get me wrong. But the pricing power associated with that relative to saving someone's life is, it's upside down. And that's why I don't quite understand. But like I said, to answer your question succinctly, is I like to go where other people aren't. And, whether that's therapeutic areas that are more difficult, or therapeutic areas that induce more risk. I think we've made some interesting strides in the CNS space. We have a couple of antibodies that are approved now in Alzheimer's. We have a number of companies going after Parkinson's disease and Lewy body dementia. And we'll figure these things out just like we did in oncology. But we need the risk capital to be there. Otherwise, these things, frankly, won't make much progress because capital it's paramount to the success of our industry.
Yeah, and I think that it's a crazy thing. I actually thought of a quote that it's another sports quote, but I'm a Leeds United soccer fan, and they had a coach who took us back to the Premier League, a guy called Marcelo Bielsa, and he was known as the crazy one. And he had a thing that said, everyone will call you crazy and your idea is crazy until they work. That's basic what you say. He was playing a style of football that was different to everyone else, and it ended up taking us back to the Premier League. It's the same kind of thing.
No, absolutely. And like I said, there's all different types of people in this industry. There's all different types of ideas. You've got the dreamers that want to build huge organizations who have raised hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars of capital. That's one way to do it. And then you have people who are just very pragmatic, which is, I have an idea, I have a compound that degrades this protein. It only goes after one, genetic disease, and we're going to be very efficient, and we're going to, do well by patients. And then you have everything in between. So that's that's one aspect of it. And then the other aspect is, okay, which targets are you going after? What therapeutic indications are you going after? And like I said, the key is that that LPs continue to actually put money into GPs, so funds, so that funds continue to invest in groundbreaking science and going beyond, the traditional risk spectrum. Listen, we're never going to conquer Alzheimer's unless we actually we continue to go out on the risk spectrum. And there are no shortcuts in some of the development of some of these programs. There are no biomarkers in some of these programs. Sometimes you just have to go to the functional data, and that takes, unfortunately, years in some of these diseases. But as long as people are willing to fund it, I'm very optimistic that the science is catching up. In fact, the science is probably ahead of where the capital is today. And so as long as those two continue to move in lockstep, I would say that the industry looks very good. There is obviously things that are on the horizon, that pricing and things that we as an industry need to do better. I think frankly, some companies need to do better in terms of how they price their programs. I think the government needs to be more efficient in terms of how they price some of the medical services. There's just a ton of waste, and I'd rather use that waste, plow it back into R&D and investment, and just make the whole ecosystem more efficient.
Yeah, nice. Then moving on to your current role with XOMA, what excites you about the future there?
Well, personally, I have a corporate ADHD. I don't like to sit and just do one thing for a long period of time. And XOMA is an interesting company because they take elements of what I used to do from an investing perspective, and elements of what I used to do from an operating perspective, and put the two together, where we're trying to acquire economic streams in future products. And there are a number of competitors that we have in our space, but generally speaking, most of them are more established. They have more capital, and they're focused on assets that are much more de-risked. We're at a very early stage. We've built a nice little moat around our business model. I would say we don't have a ton of competition. Our competition, generally speaking, is companies raising equity than relative to trying to sell a royalty stream. And what I think is very interesting is twofold. One is that the company itself is at an inflection point where hopefully in the relatively near future here, we'll become self-sustainable, meaning that we'll be able to generate free cash flow based on our milestones and our royalties so that we don't have to go raise additional capital. And the second thing is that royalty monetization is no longer a 4-letter word in the industry. So if you go back several years, many companies that sold royalties, they did it because they frankly had to do it. They were forced to do it. They weren't able to actually sell equity capital. And now that you have a number of folks that are not only skilled from a clinical perspective, but also frankly have some pretty good financial acumen. There was a deal that was done recently by Bridge Bio, where they took out some debt and sold a royalty to fund the commercialization of the program. And I was sent a Twitter feed by a friend of mine saying, the gentleman who wrote the blurb was like, I love CEOs who are cognizant of dilution. Because Bridge Bio is in a position where they could have sold probably hundreds and hundreds of millions of capital, and they didn't, because I believe the CEO of that company is obviously very, very smart, but he's also very cognizant that he's a shareholder of the company. And for every share that he actually sells in the open market, not he personally, but the company, he'll dilute his ownership. And so he went a different way. And so those are the two things that give me a lot of optimism and a sense of excitement. And the company is been in patience mode for the last 6-7 years since BVF, which is our largest shareholder, recapped the company. And more importantly is that there's a number of opportunities out there where we can unlock value for shareholders, public shareholders, by providing some value to royalty streams.
Yeah, nice. And then look, just to finish off, I always seem to ask this question, but what advice would you give to your younger self if you could?
Well, I would say that, listen, we all work very, really hard. Certainly earlier in my career, even today, I'll stay up at all hours to do things. But in reality, unless you have your health, you don't really have anything in life. So my advice is take care of yourself, take care of your family, enjoy life, take vacations when you have the opportunity to. When you have downtime, take advantage of the downtime. Listen, we're all going to work. We're all going to work hard hours, but you don't have to sit in front of a computer just because you have to put in FaceTime. I think most managers at this point in time understand that. So when you do have downtime, take advantage of it. But just frankly, just be healthy. And because like I said, if you don't have your own health, that puts the imposition not only on you, but on your family, on your colleagues. And frankly, it's not fun sitting, somewhat incapacitated, whether it be through a cold, which I have now, or more serious issues. I just think it's really important. And there's plenty of things that we can do now. We've learned that, just walking 20, 30 minutes a day can improve your health pretty significantly. Eating right, limiting alcohol intake, all these different things. I think health is the most important. Take care of yourself. And like I said, that along with all the other stuff we talked about, good things can come.
I couldn't agree more. Really couldn't. Look, thanks so much for the time today, Owen. It's been, honestly, for me, so insightful. So hopefully for everyone else, it's exactly the same thing.
Well, it's been my pleasure. I appreciate it. And more importantly, I appreciate the relationship and all the work you've done on behalf of my companies, and look forward to working together in the future.
Thanks so much, Owen. Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.